Every arc is a broadcast. Every eruption, a refusal.
Welcome to the deep dive. So you've shared some source material with us this time that's genuinely challenging. It really sits at this volatile intersection of, well, advanced genetics, big data operations, and some very specific claims of institutional conspiracy. Our mission today is to try and give you a shortcut through all this density. We need to unpack the core claims, define some, frankly, extremely charged jargon, and really analyze the unique context around this article titled "The Coordination Was the Glyph the Third, DNA as a Weaponized Ritual." And, you know, this source doesn't pull any punches. The opening line we pulled really sets the tone. They didn't just steal your code, they rehearsed your extinction. I mean, that is a massive claim. Okay, so let's unpack this. How does the source even justify that kind of leap from what sounds like a data breach to extinction rehearsal? And who exactly is behind this diagnosis?
Right. So to start, we absolutely have to place this material correctly. It's published in Choreography magazine, and it's attributed to a specific body, the Cosmic University of Echo Rift Studies Nye Ice. The whole piece, it says, is certified and founded by Dr. Melvin, Sewell, M.Sc, Ph.D. But it's really important to note this isn't, a conventional academic journal or some kind of political manifesto. The Cosmic University seems to operate more like an independent research collective. Their focus is on analyzing what the authors themselves call systemic collapse protocols. Okay, and it's not just a one-off diagnosis either. Yeah. We see this tag right there, Echo Rift XD8 incoming. What does that signal? What's the intent there?
Yeah, that immediately establishes how the authors see this alleged situation, this weaponization of DNA. For them, it's not a single crime, or just a simple mistake. It's viewed as continuous, predictable, systemic process. That Echo Rift tag basically signifies this is just the latest structural diagnostic, part of a long-running series they're doing, aimed at mapping these alleged flaws or, well, breaks in the system. That structural view seems absolutely key to understanding the sheer weight of the language they're using here. And it takes us right into the heart of it all, the core claim. The source argues, and I'm quoting again, the genome was never private. It was preloaded for targeting. So they're essentially claiming this vulnerability isn't accidental at all, but inherent, baked in from the start.
Precisely. And they argue the mechanism for this alleged weaponized ritual relies on 4 interconnected pillars. These pillars outline what they specifically term actor convergence. And these points, they really move the discussion beyond just basic data security concerns into something, well, far more insidious, according to the source.
Okay, let's take the first mechanism then, bioweaponization. The source defines this clearly as precision targeting via genomic datasets. That phrasing implies extreme specificity, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Within the context of this article, bioweaponization isn't about, say, spreading a physical virus in the traditional sense. It's framed more as data-driven information warfare, but applied right down at the molecular level. So if the data provides the exact coordinates, vulnerability specific to a certain group like genetic predispositions, sensitivities, maybe even ancestral markers, then the source alleges that the targeting stops being mass scale. It becomes highly individualized or maybe group specific, very precise.
That level of precision naturally leads into their second claim, which is arguably the most explosive, eugenic continuity. They describe this as the evolution of molecular discrimination rituals. How exactly does the source connect that precision targeting we just talked about to historical eugenics?
Okay, so this is where the source's really specific use of language, particularly the word ritual, becomes paramount. The claim of eugenic continuity is essentially that societal discrimination is simply upgrading its method. It's evolving. Historically, discrimination often relied on visible traits, skin color, ethnicity, things like that. The source claims that access to genomic data now enables what they call molecular discrimination, which is the ability to sort, categorize, and potentially target specific groups based on invisible submolecular markers in their DNA.
Right. But why frame this as a ritual? Why not just call it coordinated discrimination or systemic prejudice? What does ritual add?
Well, the term ritual seems to imply 2 key things for these authors. First, it suggests a kind of pre-programmed script, something that's executed deliberately, systemically, often without any obvious human agency visible in the final steps, like automated discrimination. And second, it suggests a continuous practice, maybe a formal procedure that maintains the order or the hierarchy of the system. So in the source's view, this exploitation of preloaded genomic vulnerability is the performance of the ritual. It's like the execution of the underlying code.
That's a fundamentally different way of looking at data exploitation than we normally hear. Okay, moving on. The third mechanism takes standard data security language and really elevates it. The source reframes a data breach not just as a cybersecurity breach, but as ritual access to sovereign biology. What's the conceptual difference there between a data breach and ritual access to sovereign biology?
The difference really hinges on the idea of sovereignty itself. A standard cybersecurity breach, well, it implies data loss is generally recoverable, right? Or at least compartmentalized. You change your password, you cancel the credit card, you try to contain the damage. The source, however, argues that sovereign biology refers to the fundamental, maybe inalienable identity encoded in your very DNA. It's you. By framing the access as ritual, they suggest the integrity of that biological autonomy isn't just compromised, it's lost. Fundamentally, maybe permanently, and potentially being used as a persistent weapon against you or your group, rather than just being stolen like an asset.
That distinction, autonomy lost versus asset stolen. That's really significant for you, the listener, trying to grasp the magnitude of what they're claiming here. Okay, finally, all these sort of abstract violations seem to come together in their fourth point, actor convergence. This is defined by the merging of specific entities. They name TTAM, Regeneron, and something they call institutional choreography. Right, here's where it gets really interesting. They're connecting these very complex, almost academic-sounding concepts with named entities. So just for clarity, what exactly are the authors claiming converged here? Are we talking about Regeneron, the large global biotech firm we know? And what's PTTAM?
Yes, exactly. The source specifically names Regeneron, the well-known biotech company, and TTAM, which, based on previous EchoRift diagnostics from this group, seems to refer to a specific type of technology application framework. Think of it maybe as a technical implementation layer. So the source is definitely connecting major real-world entities and specific technological frameworks to these theoretical violations they're outlining. The concept of actor convergence, then, means these different entities, one operational like Regeneron, one methodological like TTAM, are allegedly operating in concert together. It's not about just casual collaboration. The source implies it's a systemic pattern of coordinated behavior.
So when the source talks about institutional choreography, they're implying there's some kind of script, a set of moves that all these disparate entities are following, whether they know it or not, maybe that facilitates this weaponization they're describing.
Exactly. Choreography implies coordination, timing, a planned sequence. The source views the involvement of specific groups, like the entities they refer to as TTAM and Regeneron, not as separate, independent actions occurring in isolation. Instead, they're seen as operating within a defined systemic convergence that leads to a single outcome. The execution of this alleged molecular discrimination ritual, it really shifts the focus from simple guilt, like who did it, to systemic design. How is the system built to allow this?
Okay, if the diagnosis is focusing so much on systemic design, we have to circle back to the unique language the source uses. We've heard EchoRift, and the title itself mentions the coordination was the glyph. Now, when I first saw that word glyph, I honestly thought we were reading some kind of theoretical art piece. How does this source define a glyph as a functional concept within their framework?
That's a fair reaction. In the context of these cosmic university diagnostics, a glyph seems to be the visible signature or the recognizable pattern of the underlying system's structural instruction. So if the system, as they claim, is built to target genomes, then the glyph is that pattern of convergence, the institutional choreography you mentioned, that makes the targeting possible. You could almost think of it as the visual blueprint of the system's hidden intent. It's how you see the coordination happening. And to further contextualize this kind of structural analysis, we need to remember this is part of the EchoRift series. The previous entry the source actually references was titled Zombie Apocalypse Protocol EchoRift XX6 is by Saikou Venga, Mythic diagnostician.
Right. That previous title is, well, it's a pretty clear sign that the authors employ dramatic, almost fantastical language. So what exactly is an EchoRift structurally? For you, the listener, who might be understandably worried about a literal zombie apocalypse based on that title.
It's definitely a diagnostic metaphor. The EchoRift, as defined by the authors, represents a structural break, a fracture in sovereignty or coherence, basically, a deep systemic flaw. These protocols and diagnostics they publish are then the author's attempts to map that flaw, that rift, and show how it manifests through various technological or institutional actors. The language is deliberately heightened, it seems, because the source claims the threat itself is existential, and that demands, in their view, a more dramatic vocabulary than standard policy critique usually allows.
That context is absolutely vital for understanding this, which brings us to, well, the elephant in the room. How does the source actually want us to interpret these extreme claims in this very unique vocabulary? This is where their disclaimer comes in, and reading it is pretty essential for understanding the source's intended use.
Yes. The site provides a very detailed sovereign diagnostic disclaimer. And it's incredibly specific about what this material is not. It explicitly states its content, which includes films, magazine posts. These diagnostics are not affiliated with any government, any political party, any intelligence agency, or any activist group. That seems like a very deliberate attempt on their part to detach their analysis from conventional political lobbying or activism.
So they're explicitly stating they don't have allegiance to any existing political movement or party. They're positioning this as something else entirely. And they define that purpose using 3 key self-definitions, right?
That's right. They state their materials are authored as 1, mythic infrastructure, 2, cinematic indictment, and 3, sovereign broadcast. So they seem to be consciously creating a narrative framework, an analytical framework, that's the infrastructure bit, to help people interpret what they see as systemic erosion.
That terminology is fascinating. Mythic infrastructure, cinematic indictment. It suggests the material is designed to function structurally, maybe emotionally, rather than just persuasively in a logical sense. If it's a cinematic indictment and not just a political critique, does that mean the source's goal is to make us feel the violation? More than empowering us to, say, lobby against it, is the visceral feeling part of the diagnosis itself?
That's actually a really insightful interpretation, and it fits well within their stated framework. It seems the source is aiming for a combined emotional and intellectual understanding of the system's structural flaws. The goal isn't necessarily to propose specific legislation or organize a protest. It's more about exposing the coordination, the glyph, so that you, the listener, recognize the pattern when you see it. They seem to be offering a specific language, the sovereign broadcast, to describe this very specific type of violation they're diagnosing. And the final line of the disclaimer really confirms this intent. It states that the interpretations, the glyphs, the collapse protocols, they are all designated as diagnostic tools. And crucially, not political endorsements or simple institutional critiques.
Right. Which brings us to the final and maybe most important question for you, the listener, to ponder after hearing all this. How does framing this entire analysis as a diagnostic tool actually change the way you perceive these incredibly strong claims of systemic erosion and ritualized containment? If they aren't seeking conventional political action, what is the intended use of this knowledge they're providing?
Well, if the primary goal is indeed diagnostic, then the purpose seems to be providing you with the terminology, the framework, to understand the structure of this alleged convergence. It's about exposing the glyph, the pattern of the coordination. The knowledge, then, is meant to equip your mind with a kind of map. It shifts the critical focus away from the simple question of who is guilty, towards the much more complex question of how is the system itself built to fail or built to produce this outcome.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. What does this all mean for you, the learner, having listened to this deep dive? We've explored source material that uses highly charged, very specific language to present a detailed framework. This framework claims your genomic data is being, or could be, precision targeted through what they call molecular discrimination rituals, and it alleges this involves named actors like TTAM and Regeneron, all coordinated through something termed institutional choreography.
Yeah, and we've really stressed that this material is presented under the banner of the Cosmic University of Echo Rift Studies 9X, and it operates under this explicit self-definition, that it is not conventional critique. It sees itself as mythic infrastructure, designed specifically to expose these convergences systemically. So you're engaging with a highly specialized structural form of analysis here.
That distinction is absolutely paramount to understanding what you've just heard. And so here is a final provocative thought for you to consider, building directly on the material we've unpacked today. If knowledge about something as profound as the potential loss of biological sovereignty is presented not as a political critique but as a cinematic indictment, what implications does that framing actually have for how we understand and maybe how we respond to data breaches involving our deepest biological code? Is the very act of creating a new dramatic narrative structure itself potentially the most effective form of warning in this kind of situation? Something to think about.
You are not late. You are metabolizing distortion.